Welcome back to a Celtic State of Mind. I'm Paul John Dykes, and I'm delighted here on a Tuesday afternoon to be joined all the way from Japan by Liam Carrigan and New Zealand by Ian Conroy. I'm going to have to come straight to yourself, Liam. The wearing of blue is optional. It's not part of any big agenda around the do's and don'ts of Acsom. But let's be honest, it's always going to be acceptable to wear the 1986 blue of Argentina, isn't it?
Yep, and Saturday actually marked the 38th anniversary of Argentina winning that World Cup. So a wee commemoration there. And in the absence of a Switzerland top, I thought, what else can I wear that will annoy any English listeners?
Why not, Ian? Why not? I had a good discussion actually last week. I was talking to Tommy Sheridan, who raised that Jim Spence had put a picture out of the 1986 Scotland squad at Mexico 86, and he put out a wee poser. Imagine Maradona had been in this team. How would they have done? Sometimes, Ian, you just need that talisman in a side, don't you?
You do. Oh, imagine if we had Maradona. But I mean, back then, all through the 80s and sort of the late 70s, we had some genuinely world class players. Dalglish, chiefly. Some might say Souness, but we certainly had some world class players. But maybe if we had, I think if any team had Maradona, it would have given you half a chance. I mean, he did that with Argentina, despite the sort of the players they had. It's like I think that's why we can sort of separate him, and I think he's better. He's the best of all time because Messi had that Barcelona team, that great Harlem Globetrotters had Barcelona team, whereas Maradona, he did it in Naples with Napoli with an ordinary team. He won the Scudetto almost single-handedly, and he won the World Cup in a similar manner. So, yeah, Mick Maradona would have been quite nice.
Mick Mara, absolutely. And sometimes, as I say, you have that talisman in the side. Liam, we'll be talking this week around the level of quality that we hope to see arriving at Celtic Park. There was some interesting chat yesterday around our discussions with players such as Kieran Tierney and Scott McKenna and deals that have broken down. But it is leading to something of a frustration among some of the fans. I'm being pretty patient, I've got to say, in relation to the lack of incoming so far, Liam. Maybe 2 or 3 weeks down the line, if we're sitting here on a Tuesday, that may change. How are you feeling about it at the moment?
I think I'd rather get it done right than get it done quickly. So I'm quite happy to wait a wee while. I'm not worried. I'm not worried. I remember how few signings were actually made when we did the Japan tour, which was, in 2 weeks' time. That'll be a year ago. And we'd hardly signed any of our players at that point either. So no, I'm not worried. We will have players in place by August. That's the most important thing.
You're right. It absolutely is. I try and gauge it, Ian, on social media, on the comments section of our YouTube videos, and there are many fans who are saying, this is typical Celtic board's inactivity, dragging their heels. There's an opportunity here not only to build on what we achieved last season, but to create a massive, unsurmountable gap, if you like, between Celtic and our nearest challengers, Rangers, due to the shambolic nature of what's going on over there. How are you feeling about it, Ian? Because I know we're all about balance. You, in the past, have said you don't really have the belief in the board. Do you think it will be any different this time round? Have you changed your mind at all?
Well, no, there's not been anything to suggest that it's going to change my mind. And I say it again, I'll underline it. It's with a heavy heart that I say it. But, it's that kind of, it's not like, he's not even once bitten, twice shy, it's 2,500 times bitten, so we know the routine, we know the cycle. One thing I do ultimately is I trust Brendan Rodgers. I think I trust him, apart from on the goalkeeper side of things, where the Doris de Vries signing maybe sort of scarred me a little bit with his acumen in terms of it comes to goalkeepers, but hopefully he can right that wrong. But other than that, I think with him at the helm, I think he will absolutely demand quality. It would have been nice to get the players in, as we speak now. But again, Celtic used to do their business quietly, and the last time Brendan was here, and he pulled a few rabbits out the hat. So yeah, hopefully it's going to be different. But I don't see it happening. I don't see it happening. Is the honest answer.
That's fair enough, Ian. That's what it's all about. Do you agree with Liam? Do you agree with Ian? Let us know in the comments section. And a big thing, I'm going to go to the Haksabanovic transfer, Liam. We have spoken long and hard around the bloated nature of this squad, the mismanagement really over a number of transfer windows, which has left us with a lot of non-contributing players. Brendan Rodgers came into the club and said that he likes to play or work rather with a squad of 25. That's kind of like the long squad, the long list, and 17 or 18 as your core group. So we could effectively move on 10 players to get to that stage. But obviously, you've then got to strengthen at the same time. So the figure I had was 15, moving on 15 and bringing in, half a dozen, 7 if you're lucky kind of players. So I think that the comments made by Haksabanovic on his departure to Malmo, which was his original club, wasn't it? That's who gave him his breakthrough back in the day in Sweden. And he was saying, the board wanted to keep me, Brendan didn't. Now, for me, that's massive, that comment, because it would suggest Brendan's in driving seat here.
Yeah, I think I think that it's a shame that Haksabanovic felt he had to be kind of having the wee dig on the way out, because I think a lot of I only speak for myself, but I didn't have any particular ill will to the guy. I just thought it's not worked out for you. Wish you all the best wherever you go next. I don't really think it was necessary to put out that wee snidey one at the end.
The thing is, Liam, it seems to be more and more prevalent. I love the fact that we've got guys like Callum McGregor at the club and James Forrest who have no social media presence whatsoever. And if they're annoyed, nobody will know about it except for the people they share a house with when they get home. That, for me, is missing massively from the game, Ian. And I know that, these elite players coming into football, there's a whole generation of them where this has been the norm, hasn't it? To have that online profile, to feel as though you've got to make a comment. Your Instagram page is your brand. And if something happens in your football career, you've got to either make a show reel, put out a photo, some kind of meme, or a wee quote, a thinly veiled dig. And Haksabanovic seems to be part of that generation of footballers who think it's necessary.
I detest it personally, and it's so snivelling and insincere for me. I'm of a certain generation, so maybe I've got a fair dose of cynicism, and I don't like it at all. Do it where it matters. Do it. Haksabanovic, for example, he came with a decent reputation. Had some not bad performances coming off the bench, but ultimately he wasn't doing it, and he was shipped off to Stoke, and he was hardly pulling up trees there. So why the board would be saying they want to keep him, and the manager doesn't, I don't know. That kind of smacks of, I was going to chuck them if they didn't chuck me, type of thing, So, but yeah, all this. I mean, obviously that Goldilocks across Rangers, and all his kind of antics. I think he just epitomises that insincere, just nonsense, that sort of the modern player has to come out with, and like that Marcus Rashford, he was sort of coming out with some of the things. Was it last season, and it's like after a defeat and after letting the manager down, after letting the club down, after letting the fans down, coming out with some kind of sniffy little comment, on social media. It's like, that's not what fans want. Fans want to see dig. They want to see passion. They want to see you giving your all for the jersey, in the stadium or watching it on television. Not after the fact, when you've not done what you should have done or what you get paid to do, with some little trite comment, saying we'll try harder next time.
The thing for me as well, back in the day, players would keep their counsel. They would often have a contact maybe in a newspaper who could write a story, a well-informed story, without actually letting the cat out the bag that it's coming directly from the player. That kind of thing. But then, generally speaking, at the end of their career, they would line up a wee book, an autobiography, and they would tell everything there. Liam, they're telling us every day what they're having for their dinner and who they like, who they don't like. They're not going to have an opportunity to do that. But I think the point on the board is an interesting one. For me, the reason that the board would have wanted to keep Haksabanovic is because we got him at a cut price deal originally, 1.7, 1.8 million quid. Due to the scenario that the situation that Ruben Kazan were in at that time, out of their hands, and obviously we got him on the cheap. They had paid 4.5 million quid for the player, And I think the board's plan was to do a quick profit on this guy. Give him the games, give him Champions League experience, sell him on to Malmo or somewhere else, and make that £4.5 million and make the profit on the transfer fee. That's why the board would have wanted to keep him, I think, Liam.
Yeah, I think that was what was envisaged when he was initially signed, definitely. But unfortunately, performances didn't meet up to that expectation. And like any asset, if it doesn't perform, the value goes down. And that's the situation with Haksabanovic. And we actually, I'm surprised at the time we didn't look to get more players in from the Russian league, because it's actually a very good standard of league, and I think we could have made quite a few decent signings from that league if we'd have got in there at the time.
Yeah. So who did we get from Rubin Kazan then? We did sign. That's where Starfelt came from, right? And we got a wee bit later Haksabanovic, and I think Oliver Obelgard as well came in from there, but it didn't quite work out. And obviously, what we're left with is a player who I think we all knew that technically he was a good player, gifted, but he's at the age of 25 now. He's been playing first team football at various clubs for 10 years. And, at 25, you're kind of thinking that any of these kind of like discrepancies about your character and throwing the toys at the pram, you'd have sorted it out by now, knuckled down, took your opportunity at a club that's playing Champions League football every season, and just embraced it. Another big thing that I would say, and I know that you followed his career when he was in Liverpool, Ian, Brendan Rodgers, and the fact that he doesn't seem to suffer fools. And, he has shipped off Haksabanovic, he's shipped off Bernabe. More of that, please. I'm all about that. I think that's a great trait in a manager.
Absolutely. That's what we demand as fans. And it's I fully agree. I think he's a very intelligent, articulate fella, as Brendan. I think he's a credit to the club. When he speaks, I like to listen. I could listen to him all day, and he doesn't suffer fools. So good job he doesn't come here and talk to me. Otherwise, I'd be sent packing. But he's and that's it's music to my ears when I hear that kind of stuff. It's like you get the opportunity at a club, and you're given that opportunity. If you don't take it, then you don't get along. That's the pressure. That's the standard at Celtic and a club of our size. So there's only so many times you can give people chances before they're shipped out, and sent packing. And thankfully, we've got Brendan at the helm who will sort of keep that standard, and hopefully moving forward, that it raises that standard as well. And that becomes the benchmark.
Yeah, and that's part of what we talk about all the time, where we speak about culture in a football club, Liam. Because, sometimes, and it's happened, Celtic have fallen into this trap, you can have a group of players who more or less run the show in terms of the culture, the attitude, let's turn against the gaffer. All it takes is a group of half a dozen players, influential players, and before you know it, you can cliche alert, lose a dressing room. Brendan Rodgers is not going to allow that to happen. And I think that when you look at the group of players that he's got guys on that park who live his culture and share his mentality, in the likes of Callum McGregor, James Forrest, the departed Joe Hart, of course, I would have put into that category. And I think some of the guys that have joined that group, like Matt O'Reilly, I think he's got it. I think Cameron Carter-Vickers has got it. So if you're going to come in, you're going to stand out like a sore thumb rather than, blend into that kind of bad attitude within the dressing room. And moving forward, we're talking about bringing in players, and there's a lot of people who are becoming impatient, Liam. You said at the top of the show, you've got to bring in the right players, not just in terms of their quality, but do they fit into that dressing room as well and that mentality that he's building?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, if ever there was a time when a Celtic manager was going to lose the dressing room, it would have been, around about January this year, when it was looking like we might not win the league and results were not going our way. And to be honest, Brendan Rodgers, the manager, went up a lot in my personal estimation about that time, because clearly he pulled the squad together at a time when it would have been easy for cliques to form and things to fragment and frustration to get the better of us, because we knew that we were the best team in the league, but we were not performing like it. And I think it speaks a lot to Brendan Rodgers' character that he managed to pull that squad together and get the title over the line. So I think I totally agree with you. I think that, well, I hope that the players we're looking at now, because I'm sure we are looking at players in the background. I hope Brendan Rodgers is looking at their character as well as their footballing ability and think, are these guys who are going to come in and buy into what I'm trying to build here? Because, players like Joe Hart did. Joe Hart was not a Celtic man when he came to us. I think he definitely is now. He totally bought into everything we were all about, and it was wonderful to see. And I think that players like that, are, it's not everything, but if they are on board with the culture of the club as well as the footballing side of it, then that's a really, really good positive for the player and the team as well.
Yeah,
Can I just jump in there? Sorry to interrupt again. On Joe Hart, I think his replacement obviously is obviously a major factor, but just his presence in the dressing room, and I think he was a really good foil for Callum as captain. I think he, when he left, he did that sort of the evening with Joe Hart, and Callum speaks so highly of him. But obviously his experience, he kept to protocol. He didn't step on anyone's toes, but he was there as another experienced voice, and I think that sort of difficult period. I'm only surmising, but I'm pretty sure that Joe Hart, I'm glad he was in the dressing room at that during that period, and I think that his experience would have been massive. So we're not just having to replace a goalkeeper of his caliber, but also the guy, and sort of almost Karl Mack's lieutenant, in terms of captaincy.
No, you're right. And I think that, some of the goalkeepers we've been linked to, and I mentioned the other day there, Paddy Sinnott wrote an article on the 20 keepers that have been linked to Celtic since Joe Hart announced his retirement. It's a balance of bringing somebody in, right, who we probably should have done this in the last 3 years, Liam. I'm going to put this out there, maybe as a slight criticism. Bringing somebody in who basically just steps into Joe Hart's gloves. You don't step into a pair of gloves. That would look a wee bit strange, but you would certainly step into his position. We don't have that. And I think that has been a missed opportunity. We've had 3 years to bring somebody in who maybe is on the right side of 25, let's say, when you sign him. He's working under Joe Hart for 3 seasons, with the wealthy experience that he's got. 2 World Cup finals, 2 European Championship finals, Champions League football with Man City. He's won everything north and south of the border. You imagine what a 22, 23-year-old goalkeeper would have learned over the last 3 years, Liam. Yet we find ourselves in a position where we've lost Joe, we've lost the third choice, Benji Siegrist, and now we're trying to get a blend of either an experienced goalie plus the one we've just mentioned, or maybe just one experienced goalie and running with Scott Bain plus another. And that's a bad situation to be in. We should have worked quicker, not since the retirement of Joe Hart was announced, prior to that.
Aye, absolutely. I think that to use an example, now I'm not saying that we're on the same level in terms of ability, whatever, but just in terms of the situation, I think back to Man United when Peter Schmeichel left. They went through a series of goalkeepers over a course of a couple of years, because it wasn't just about, Mark Bosnich was a good goalkeeper. Massimo Taibi was a good goalkeeper until he went to Man United. It was about having the character to play for a club that size and a dressing room with that many characters in it. And that's where, it wasn't until they signed Fabian Barthez a couple of years later. He was a big enough character in his own right. He'd won a World Cup. He'd done it all in the game at that point. And he was like, it's not Barthez is signing for Man United. It's Man United are signing Barthez. He's the man. That was the kind of the mentality. And I think we need, we won't get a keeper of that level, but I think that we need someone with that kind of character, that kind of confidence, that kind of self-assurance, and that big presence. The big presence is crucial.
I think that we've lost such a presence in Joe Hart that you're right, Liam. You look at that defence. I'll ask you what you think of it. You look at the back four. What's our first choice back four? Right back, Alistair Johnson. Left back, Greg Taylor. And the 2 centre halves at the moment are Cameron Carter-Vickers and Liam Scales. Now, if you bring into that equation someone who doesn't have those attributes, to use Double Denham's favourite word, Ian, then I'm looking at that defence and thinking it's pretty ordinary. I think you need that. It's the missing link to have not just somebody who has the technical ability between the sticks, but the leadership quality to actually boss that defence. Because, listen, I mean, I know there's experience there with Greg Taylor. I get it. There's international experience with Carter Vickers and Johnson as well. I just don't think it's a strong defence. I would expect us to start with a stronger defence. I'm hoping that we do have a new left back and left central defender. But you need that goalkeeper. There really is, over the last 3 years, that, for me, almost a reliance on the man at the back to absolutely organise that defence. And it's chopped and changed, particularly in the central defensive areas. Ian, it's the biggest signing of the summer for me.
Of course it is. You know, I've heard some pundits say that, you know, the goalkeeper is the hardest position and also the most important position on the pitch, which I suppose it makes sense to say that. You know, you need someone between the sticks. But yeah, I think it's, you know, any great team, and you look at it's always the spine, isn't it? You know, the sort of the great managers have always said the strong spine is the bedrock for any team. You know, and obviously starts with the goalkeeper. So it's, and I said this in the last pod. You know, it's like, I mean, you asked the question, and I still think that's the case, that we're going to need two keepers. And you make a cracking point there that why didn't we do that a year ago? Get someone else in, like an understudy who was going to be sort of learning, you know, and learning from Joe Hart. My sort of thoughts were, well, could we bring in Fraser Forster and a younger, maybe more expensive keeper but then he hasn't got the pressure of buckling under sort of being a record signing or an expensive signing for a goalkeeper, and we've got that backup of Fraser Forster, you know, and we kind of rotate the two for a season or two. But again, we shouldn't be in that position, you know. But absolutely, it's imperative. I mean, look, Joe Hart set the standard, hasn't he?
Yeah,
you know, and I think it's going to be, you know, so there's a lot of pressure there as well, you know. But who knows what's going on in the background? Whether we're just going to use it as an excuse that we're looking at, you know, the Euros are still on, so there's players that we're looking at there. I'm sure we won't sign anyone that's been at the Euros. It'll be some dauber from somewhere, you know, that we probably don't even know about. And it's if it's a gem and we unearth a gem, we'll all be loving it. But it's 50-50 at the moment.
Yeah, and let's go over to the comment section to see what the troops are saying in there. Jamie Young, is it still a 12:30 start every weekday, Jamie? 12:30. As long as it says 12:30 on my watch, it means we're no late. So maybe your watches are fast. I don't know, because we get a wee dig here and there, Liam, if we're a minute or two late. But yes, 12:30.
Apologies, I was on the phone trying to flog a Slovakia shirt for some reason.
Absolutely. Listen, 12:30 Celtic Park time, I think you say. Right, so let's run through some of your points here. Has Brendan Rodgers been to the Skylark Bar yet? Now, unless it's happened in the last week, I would say no. Lawrence, of course, is not with us today, but he was at the Acsom live event on Thursday, and he certainly never mentioned that Brendan had popped in. Stranger things have happened. Remember, he popped into St. Roch's to manage the Celtic select side as assembled by Acsom. What a day that was back in October. That was incredible. We've also got, can anyone tell me, here you go, John Keenan, let's bring you in, John. Can anyone tell me who does the scouting at Celtic? Well, I had a really interesting discussion about this actually over the weekend. I was down in London at the Jimmy Johnston tournament. There were 14 CSCs involved. Luton won the big cup. Well done to them. And I'm looking forward to next year, actually, whereby we will take down an Acsom team. Gentlemen, it would be great if you could add a wee bit of continental flair to the Acsom team. If you're in the area around about this time in 2025, you can come down, get the shooting boots on. Ian, I'm looking at you as a kind of samurai style player, just playing off the striker. Would I be right in saying that?
When I was younger, I played up front or on the wing, yeah.
There you go.
I was lanky until I was 14. I stopped growing. I was 14. Then everyone caught up with me and took over. So if you're talking school football, yeah.
So you'd have stood out like a sore thumb. Aye, we all know a few players like that. Liam, you're a centre half, mate. Am I right?
Goalie. I've been a goalie since I was 14. Had a trial with Queen's Park when I was 16.
Did you?
And yeah, although saying that, whenever I play outfield, I usually play midfield because I've got a decent left foot on me. I'm a left footer, which is it's unusual, I suppose. So
I had trials for left foot. I had trials for Blackburn and Coventry back in the day.
Did
Well
you?
done.
Brilliant. I love that. I didn't have any trials. There you go. It was just the lack of ability that always kind of held me back. John
Me
Keenan. Liam, you're going to have a fight in your hands for the goalie gloves. I think Jerry Taylor might want to get a game as well. Can anyone tell me who does the scouting? Right. So, as I say, I had a great wee conversation around this. So, at the moment, the head of scouting, and again, correct me if I get the surname wrong, Jay Lefevre, is that how you say it? Formerly of Arsenal. He's the head of scouting. He's working with Brendan Rodgers and Michael Nicholson as we speak around the signing and recruitment of players. We know Tosh McKinley is part of the scouting team. Now, when you asked the question, I jumped onto the most up-to-date list I could find. And alongside Tosh McKinley, there are other names. Now, these may have left the building, so apologies if they have. But at the last check, and the site I'm checking is normally quite up to date, we have the following: Steve Watson, Craig Strachan, Neil Moran, Mark Cooper, Lee McCafferty, 2, 4, 6 scouts working under Jay to do all the scouting for Brendan Rodgers, and obviously look out the players that Brendan wishes to bring to the football club. Yes, Gordon, here we go. Good afternoon, guys. Rodgers will never have total control as long as Lowell lurks in the background. Right. This keeps coming up. And every time it comes up, I think we need to discuss it because people will think you're naive to disagree with that. Liam, I'm going to ask you first about this, right? But when you look at the makeup of a football club, it would not make sense if you want to be an elite club, if you want to be any kind of level of football club, if the chairman was getting involved in footballing matters such as recruitment. Right. So the comment Gordon makes, it's not a dig at Gordon. There's many other people in the comments say exactly the same thing. Liam, that is dysfunctional. Surely that's not going on at Celtic. I ask you the question, Liam Carrigan.
I don't think it is going on, but I think in the past it clearly has. And I think the board have not done enough in terms of, pushing the boat out and getting marquee signings and to show that those days are behind us. I think that I don't think that is the case anymore, but I think that more could be done to show that that is not the case anymore.
Well, it really is the influence of an individual, Ian, in the past. And we know the influence that Peter Lawwell had at Celtic. We actually know the job that he did at the football club as well. That would lead you to believe that you can't come in a different capacity and have less of an influence. And I get it. You can imagine it at any workplace that you've been in. When the high Heejin walks out the building, when he comes back in, he's always going to have that presence. He's going to have an influence over certain individuals. But we can't run our football club like that. As I said before, that would be completely dysfunctional. And the one thing that I keep going back to is Brendan Rodgers left the football club because of that involvement, Liam. I mean, it's no secret. That's why he left. He's touched on it a wee bit in relation to the players that were being presented to him. Were at this side of the scale and the ones he wanted were at that side of the scale. It was night and day. And he walked a result of it, sullied his legacy. It played on his mind, apparently, and that is one of the reasons why he wanted to come back to the football club to repair that legacy. He's not going to walk back into the same situation, Ian. Now, we know that Peter Lawwell's back at the club. We know that at least one of the transfer windows since Rodgers has come back has not been good enough, far from good enough, which is why, fans like Gordon are saying what he's saying. I'm not taking a dig at him. I just don't think we could possibly fall into that trap again, Ian. Am I being naive here?
Well, I think if that does happen again and Brendan walks, he'll walk with his head held high because we'll know the real reason. And I've got an inkling that was probably why he left the last time. I think he probably thought he'd reached that glass ceiling and he couldn't get beyond it. And it's almost like Peter Lawwell left because sort of the 10 in a row and the sort of the irony that sort of came out of that. It reminds me of I don't know if you remember when the stories about when Bill Shankly was quit Liverpool.
Yeah. And
then Bob Paisley took over and then he was coming back to the training ground and the guys were still calling him boss. But yeah, Paisley was the manager. They had to Liverpool to have a word and say, look, you can stop coming down, because it was that. And you're probably right. He's left sort of with one hat on, come back with a different hat on, but people are still going to have, who's boss, So, but I think Brendan Rodgers is a strong enough character, and he's got enough of a reputation that it is nonsense, really. It's nonsense, and it's fiscally, Peter Lawwell is second to none. He's done a great job. He runs a tight ship, all that kind of stuff. But he's not strategic. He's not a football man. He's a fan like us, but he's not a football man. So I think Brendan has got enough backbone to back himself. And if same shenanigan happens again, he walks. He'll go with his head held high.
Yeah, because we know the inner workings of the previous departure. James Devine, Paul John, when will we make a signing? I'm getting a bit frustrated now. No, I totally get it, James. I think what happens is you've got to try and strike a balance here, because obviously there's one way of approaching this, which is that quite clearly not much is being linked to the press. Liam, we're going about our business in a really kind of, I think, strategic manner, but we're not telling anybody anything. And I had something we've got obviously the Celtic State of Mind Facebook group is quite large, and there's a lot going on in there, but often something piques my interest. So we spoke about Kieran Tierney and Scott McKenna yesterday. Up until the weekend, I hadn't verified anything. And as you know, working in journalism, I don't work in journalism, but Liam, you would have known verifying sources, verifying information, corroborating information. It's so important before you actually put it out there. So up until a certain point, you're basically speculating, right? And I think on Acsom, we speak about speculating and we speak about opinions. And these things are fine as long as you don't sell them as fact. But over the weekend, I got a couple of things verified and spoke about it on the show yesterday, because it's interesting to me and it's going to be interesting to other fans, I'm sure. But the minute you put that out there, it's you don't know what you're talking about. You're making that up. That's speculation. That's gossip. Listen, it's not. Celtic were interested in both these players. And for one or other reason, one being wages with McKenna, the other being injury with Tierney, those deals aren't progressing at the moment. And unless McKenna comes down in terms of his expectations of a wage, we won't be signing him. I mean, let me know in the comment section, would you sign Scott McKenna for 30 plus grand, never mind 40 plus grand a week? Of course you wouldn't. I don't think anyone would. And I know we're getting him on a fee and all that kind of stuff, but there's no way he's worth that kind of money. And the club agree with that. But you put it out there as verified information, Liam, and people still don't believe you. But I do think that we are playing our cards close to our chest deliberately here. And I would rather that than some of the nonsense that's getting fed to the press by Rangers, because they've got the biggest bad news story bubbling under the surface. Nobody wants to touch it.
No, I mean, Rangers are, excuse me being political here, they're basically the Nigel Farage of Scottish football. They're on TV spouting nonsense every day, getting maximum coverage, and in the end, it will come to absolutely nothing. Mm-hmm. It's just, and I mean, you can say that about all politicians to a certain degree, but he's the one that particularly annoys me. But it's just a thing that we're going to have to deal with, is that there's going to be all this speculation, and it's going to continue. And the problem is that journalism is in the gutter, has been for about 15 years now. It's all about the headline. It's all about the attention. It's all about the engagement, as they call it, with the headlines and the keywords and all this nonsense. It's not about reporting truth, and it hasn't been for a very long time. And you see that, well, you see it in an election, but you also see it in the way that Rangers are covered in Scotland, because it's not about telling the truth. It's about what's going to get all these gullible Rangers fans to buy newspapers. Mm-hmm. That's ultimately what it's about.
Yeah. Or in the modern day, what's going to make them click on the article? I'm going to bring this up. Henry McLarson, again, not a dig. You're on the show virtually every day. I know you have to grab people's attention, but these headlines seem a bit hyperbolic. Actually, the headline could be the Tuesday Bulletin, a Celtic State of Mind, Acsom. The biggest search terms on our YouTube channel are Acsom and a Celtic State of Mind. But I get your point. The reason I used it, because I know people do use the old clickbait headline. The reason I use this one, this is really the first tangible information we've got, because we're not going to get it from the club, right? This is the first tangible information that we've got in relation to the decision-making process over recruitment. And it was said by Haksabanovic in his farewell Instagram, get it up you, And so that's why we've run with it. It's a wee tidbit of information, Ian, that before today we didn't have that. And it's given us an inkling as to Brendan Rodgers, I says to Liam earlier on, he's driving this bus. He's at the wheel. He's the man at the wheel. That fills me with a lot of confidence. That's why I've used it. I see it more of as a positive headline than trying to drag people in.
Yeah, absolutely. It's his neck on the block, isn't it? You know, ultimately, and especially coming back, there's a lot of stake for Brendan Rodgers. You know, after all that went on before and coming back, so you know, he's not going to get another chance at it after. If it turns sour this time, he's not going to come back for a third time. I wouldn't have thought. So it's essential that he shows that backbone. He stands up and is counted, and he gets in there. He's absolutely the players that he wants. And if he doesn't, and he walks, he goes with my blessing.
I think you would understand it. Last time, it felt as if the rug had been pulled from under our feet, Liam, when Brendan Rodgers walked before. You then go through a process of finding out more information. He's talked about wee bits of it himself. But the frustration of the last summer transfer window simply couldn't be repeated, because I do fear that any manager faced with that situation would find it almost unmanageable, and they may well walk. I'm not at that stage yet. I get, you know, like Plunge McNugget coming in saying, fed up now, it's 4 weeks until the season starts, only Haksabanovic has left the building, nobody in the door yet. There will be frustrations. I mean, again, we're in an environment where information is required for every second of the day, Liam. If you're into Celtic, you want Celtic information, you want instant gratification. And as soon as we make that first signing, we'll be looking for a second one. It doesn't leave you until the first ball is kicked or until the transfer window closes. And a big part of that is just the, you know, society in which we live in now. It's all about information overload, isn't it? Every single one of us walks about with a device in our pocket, at the side of our bed, wherever you're going, there is a device there, and it's just information, constant information. And we're getting to a stage where you crave it almost, Liam. I mean, let's be honest, we're only a few weeks into the transfer window. Let's not panic about it.
And the problem is there is almost no curation of that information. It's just fired out there and it's regurgitated and blown out of proportion or played down in other cases. And like, it's actually interesting to watch it all from Japan from a certain distance, because I only read a very, very small selection of the media that you get every day in Scotland, because I simply don't have time to sit and read all these different newspapers, websites, whatever. And I go with a general rule of thumb that if three different sources have reported something, there's got to be some truth in it. Now, I say 3 different sources, not 3 different publications. It's important to read and see where they're getting information from. If like 5 different papers run a story, but it's all the same quote from the same source, it's probably nonsense, right? Always look for, to me, that's the rule of thumb. If there are 3 unique, independent sources telling you something, there's at least an element of truth to it.
The first thing you look for is direct quotes. You know, I mean, how many times I saw a story yesterday, I think, about Jude Bellingham's deep-rooted love for Rangers Football Club, and it was actually built. It was built around the guy running out the tunnel, right, for a Champions League game or whatever, and saying some gaff this or something like that, right? And they've used that. Right, they've used that to build. Honestly, Liam, avoid it at all costs. I actually, right, I've got to admit, I looked at it to see how ridiculous the story was. That's why I looked at it, and it was confirmed. I'm looking for, you know, the deep paragraphs from Jude Bellingham going on about, I used to play Rangers when I was playing Subbuteo as a child and all this rubbish. It wasn't even there. He basically said some gaff this when he ran out the tunnel, and they built a story around it about Jude Bellingham's deep-rooted love of Rangers. I mean, I'm not being funny. It's almost as if they're getting paid in succulent lamb for this kind of nonsense, Liam.
I'm giving away my age here, but wasn't Subbuteo like finished about 10 years before Bellingham was even born? I mean,
it wouldn't surprise me. He probably always went Rangers when he played Football Manager. That kind of nonsense. All he said, Liam, the only thing he said about Rangers was when he was running out the tunnel, some gaff this, running out at Ibrox. Well, I'll tell you what, if you ran out of just now, you might not say the same on next season or the season after that, or whenever you're able to play at Ibrox Park. But yeah, it just shows you, what do you want? What would you rather? Would you rather that nonsensical reporting of creating fictitious stories about your football club? Or would you rather we just went about our business, Ian, and we went about it quietly, and when the players are in place, we announce it and we do it professionally? I would much rather the latter.
Well, so would I. Absolutely, so would I. And I want to sort of underline as well that I'm not trying to be sort of reactionary or, you know, or overly dramatic. My concern is based on mapping it over a long period of time, you know, and us being sold the proverbial dummy season on season, and there's always an excuse. The greatest ones recently have been, you know, the players haven't been there, they've not been available. Well, if you surely you should have a set of targets. We all know the positions that have got to be strengthened. So if you can't get your top target, then you go to your next one. This is what I think any team does, or any recruitment department does. So you don't just say, oh, well, we couldn't get our target, the quality wasn't there, so we're just going to stick with what we've got. So, you know, we're significantly weakened this season after the players that we've lost, and potentially going to lose. So, yeah, obviously I'm hoping that they're doing it quietly in the background, and there's going to be this conveyor belt of class that's going to come in through the door. I've got my doubts, but I'm hoping. You know, I'm a positive person. So I'm hoping that they're going to prove me wrong. Hopefully they're watching this and they actually really go out just to spite me and my negativity, and go and do it, and then, you know, we end up getting what we want.
I don't think you're negative. I've said it before, Ian. I don't think you're negative. I think what you're doing there is looking at the experience of how the club operates, and not getting overly excited about the £36 million that I've claimed Celtic will spend this summer. I think it was on the back of, Liam, right? Roy Keane spoke about turning down Real Madrid for Celtic. Wayne Rooney spoke about, they were the team that I regret not playing for. And it was there, and there were direct quotes. It was on the overlap with Gary Neville. So it's like, we need to get, who's hot now? Bellingham scored an overhead kick the other night. Let's write a story and link them to Rangers. And they've found this wee bit of footage. It's desperation, isn't it? It really is.
You know, I'm just going to share one bit of punditry which I read online about the England game, and this is the best comment about the Euros so far. Most apt, I think. They said, you know, I'm not surprised that England took to the last minute to see off Slovakia. He said the English always struggle against places with small populations. Iceland 2016, Croatia 2018, South Armagh in the 70s. You know. Yeah. Anyway, moving on.
You're right. But one final point to note, people dropping big Celtic bombs on the press is Archie Gray. Archie Gray obviously signed. You're laughing there because I shouldn't have used that term.
Bombs was the wrong word to follow.
That was the wrong choice. The wrong choice of words under the circumstances. Archie Gray, 30 million quid, he has signed for Ange Postecoglou. He's a player that, again, I've said this in the past, in terms of English football, I'm not as invested as I used to be when I was younger. I'm just too interested and too invested in what's happening at Celtic. But anything Celtic related will get my interest. So he's speaking about his admiration for Ange Postecoglou, his admiration for Celtic. And it shouldn't really come as a surprise when you look at Archie Gray's kind of family connections. You'll remember not that long ago, actually, that we actually lost a former player. It was in January, I think it was announced. You'll remember Stuart Gray played in the kind of early 90s. He came through the ground staff with Simon Donnelly. He played for Tommy Burns' team, Stuart Gray. Well, Stuart Gray, let me get the familial link correct. So Archie Gray, his dad's cousin was Stuart Gray. And obviously, you'll know that Stuart's dad was Eddie Gray as well. So he came out and spoke, Liam, in glowing terms about Celtic and Ange Postecoglou and all this as he penned a £30 million deal at Tottenham Hotspurs as well. But as soon as I saw the name, I remember seeing a picture of Stuart Gray going down to watch him play when he was at Leeds United, and just thinking to myself, there are certain families where football just runs in the blood, isn't there? And there's generations of them make it as footballers. There must be a gene in there somewhere, Liam. Brian McClare doesn't think you're born with talent. I'm not sure. What do you think?
No, I think Diego Maradona disproves that. Born with a natural gift, and if he wasn't if he wasn't a fan of the Colombian marching powder, how far could he have gone otherwise? That's the other question. The other thing is, though, that it's about. I think that a natural talent can easily be wasted, but someone who's not necessarily that naturally gifted can become a very accomplished player if they work at it. I certainly agree with that. I think there's plenty of examples of that, of players who don't have all the flair and all the skill, but they become very, very effective players at the highest level because they know something they're good at and they work on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think a great example of a player who wasn't born with the natural ability, but who maximised his career was Paul Lambert. He won a Champions League. There was a moment in that player's career, Ian, where he was a free agent. He had been playing for St Mirren and Motherwell. I mean, I remember seeing him playing, particularly for Motherwell. I know he broke through very, very young at St Mirren, 17-year-old, when they won the Scottish Cup in '87. But I remember him for Motherwell thinking he was a tidy player. But when he left Motherwell, if he had signed for Celtic, it would have excited me. He's gone over to Borussia Dortmund, of course, and I think there was also offers at the time from PSV Eindhoven. He's gone over to Borussia Dortmund and reinvented himself almost. But he maximised his football career through dedication, application, attitude, all these things that you can't teach someone. It's either in them or not. And there's been loads of players with more ability than Paul Lambert who haven't won a Champions League winners' medal in Scotland.
Well, that's it. It's that kind of the talent. I think it was Brendan Rodgers, wasn't he? He said a few years ago, like, talent alone is not enough. I'm forever saying this to my children as well, and it's like just at a very, very obviously much lower level. But if you've got talent, and it's generally the players that you say, like Liam, God-given talent, these the guys do sort of are more wayward, we call them the wayward genius, and they kind of don't always fully realise that potential, whereas the players that generally do excel, the likes of the Lampards and that, maybe not as naturally gifted, but they've got that work ethic. And I think Paul Lambert falls into that category, but he was in an environment where, he's fully energised by he's going to Borussia Dortmund. He's surrounded by better players. So that's when you bring him up as well. And he's got that work ethic. So you marry the two. It's just it's a recipe for success. And I think an example I remember from years ago, like having mates, Liverpool fans, they say that Keegan wasn't naturally a gifted footballer, but he was the hardest working player. And then obviously they got the direct comparison when he went to Hamburg and they brought in Dalglish. Dalglish is obviously a gift from God, in terms of his talent, and they had that direct comparison. But both equally, world-class players.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's one example that I always go back to is Paul Lambert. But what we're looking for here is people who have already established that they do have the quality, they do have the ability, and we can bring them in. Jungle Lion, I can make up a mad rumour right now if you want. Let's make one up for the crack. What would my mad rumour be? All right. So the first bit's true. We were in discussions with Kieran Tierney prior to his injury at the Euros. So we're obviously still looking for a left back. My mad rumour would be Andrew Robertson. There you go. How much would it cost to get Robertson to Celtic, Liam?
Too much. Too much is the simple answer.
There you go. There's the mad rumour. You asked for it, Jungle Line, and I provided it with gusto.
A few years ago on Twitter, a shout out for Bobby Bluebell, right? He used to, this was picked up by a couple of publications, but he used to put on Twitter, is there any truth in the totally made up rumour? And then he'd write a rumour, right? And a couple of local publications picked up on these rumours that he'd written, saying it was totally made up.
Oh, brilliant. Well, that what I just said about Robertson was completely made up at the request of Jungle Line. There you go. But I do like him, and I would like to see him playing for Celtic at some point in the future. Donny Tiny Hands, £36 million for prawn sandwiches. Smell the glove, laughing at my 36 million. Why have I come to this fee? Why have I come to this fee? Right. What do we need? That's the first thing. Right. So we finished the season off, Liam, with a group of players that quite clearly Brendan Rodgers trusted, right? And he used them. And one of the guys that came back into the side was James Forrest. He used Adam Ida. You know, these are the guys that he trusted. It was a very core group of players. How many players do you think he trusted? 15, 16? There wasn't a great deal, right? So for the last run-in, that was a group of players that he trusted. And since then, we have lost Joe Hart, we have lost Adam Ida and Paulo Bernardo. So we're 3 down from that group of players. What do we need to bring into the football club just to get us back up to what we had before, which wasn't enough? I mean, we made it by the skin of our teeth. Okay, so we need a goalie. We need a centre midfielder to replace Bernardo. We need a centre forward to replace Ida. So we need 3 players. And if we're talking about quality, what kind of fees have been bandied about for Ida? I've read everything from 6 to 8 million quid. What about Bernardo? I've read reports from 3.5 to 7, as high as 7. So let's say the players that you're bringing in, if it's going to be quality signings, what kind of figure on average are we talking here? 5 or 6 million quid, guys? If it's going to be quality?
Yeah.
Is that the figure? I don't even think that's enough, but let's say it's 5 or 6. Goalkeeper, central midfielder, centre forward. We need a left back. We're running with 1 at the moment. We need a left central defender. We need a winger. We need another midfielder should we lose anybody else, right? There's 7 players at 5 million quid. 35 million quid.
What's the chances as well that it'll be sold as a good news? Say if we did sign, we do sign Ida and Bernardo, that's sold as a signing and a good news story. They're actually from last season that we need to get in to add. So you're quite right. And also as well up top, we need two goalkeepers. I'd go for Ida and Majowski. I think we need both of them. And I think we've got the money to go and do it. But you're right. There's a massive amount of playing staff when you get in.
The point you made there, actually, I said a striker, you need 2 because O's leaving. Goalkeeper, you need 2 because obviously we're running with Bain at the moment. That takes us up to 7 or 8 players. If you're spending 5 or 6 million quid, which I think is your starting price for any level of quality, you might get lucky. You might get lucky, but it shouldn't be a rule of thumb. You might get a Matt O'Reilly for 1.5, but listen, it's an anomaly rather than a rule, right? So you're looking at 5, 6, 7 million pound a player. If we want to bring the players in that we need to start off a Champions League campaign next season, you're signing half a dozen, 7, maybe even 8 players, and you're going to be spending that kind of money. Now, that obviously isn't net because we've already started clawing some of the money back. Tim, you've brought up a name that has been reported, Dara O'Shea. There's been a link that I started reading about this morning from Burnley. I think he signed for Burnley about a year ago for something like 7 million quid. So this is what I'm talking about. That's your starting point. Okay, so say he's the centre half that we're interested in because Scott McKenna wants 40 grand a week. Michael brings up the point. Burnley have no manager at the moment because obviously company's gone away to some other site. Was it Bayern Munich or something? That's some step up. So he's away to Bayern Munich. So they're going to have to wait until they've got something in place, perhaps, unless they do their business until before that happens. Michael goes on to say Burnley bought O'Shea for £7 million 12 months ago. They will want big money for him if the story is true, which I doubt. This is going to be a hugely expensive player to bring to the football club, Liam. Even if they make £1 million profit on him, plus the wages. I just spoke about McKenna playing for Nottingham Forest, making high 30s a week. Once you go down there, it's difficult to bring them back to Scottish football because the wages are astronomical.
Aye, it's I really think that on one hand, the papers make up all these positive stories about Rangers, and then they link Irish players with Celtic to try and get the other way. I don't know enough about this player, so I'm going to assume a name like Dara O'Shea that he is from Ireland. Maybe I'm wrong in
He's
that.
an international, Irish international. Yep.
Right.
They're also trying to sell O'Reilly for 20 million. Which I think is vastly under what would even. I mean, look at Elliot Anderson has just gone for 35 million from Newcastle to Forest. What, just because he's played a couple of games in England? I mean, It's ridiculous, and I think it is paper talk. I think it's the sort of the gutter press up here, trying to just flog our players on the cheap, flog them, but also on the cheap as well. And 20 million is on the cheap in today's market for a player like Matt O'Reilly, who was coveted by Atletico Madrid because of his performances in the Champions League. So, would you rather have quality from the Champions League or quality from the self-proclaimed best league in the world?
Well, see, the thing with O'Reilly, I've not really indulged in the O'Reilly stuff over the last couple of weeks. I don't want to be accused of peddling the narrative that we're going to sell him, to be honest with you, right? I'm realistic enough to know that if a bid comes in large enough, the player is interested in leaving, it's going to happen. Of course it is, but it's not something that I want to focus on too much. But when I saw that story, I looked at the club and I'm thinking, Matt O'Reilly to Southampton. Liam, are we not beyond that now? Are we not beyond the Van Dijk time whereby the player has to go to a lower side in England to prove himself? Andy Robertson, the aforementioned, had to do it with Hull City, didn't he?
Can I just sorry to jump in, Liam? Right? Can I just say, just on that point, I think Matt O'Reilly's a good example of the fact that look what he did when he was at Fulham. He was offered a contract, but he had a plan and a career path. So I think he's a different kettle of fish. So I don't think he would actually choose to go, even if it was a 35 million offer from Southampton. I don't think he would choose to go to Southampton. I think he would bide his time and wait for the right club. Just my view. Sorry for jumping in there, mate.
No, I would pretty much agree with you. O'Reilly's a much better player than Southampton. That's there's no doubt. Now the fact is that the stupid amounts of money that are in English football, any team in that Premier League could cough up 30 or 40 million for O'Reilly if they really wanted to. Any team in that league could do that. But I think, Atletico Madrid is the sort of standard that he should be aiming for. At Celtic, he's going to get Champions League football up until Christmas, actually just after Christmas this year. And the question for him is, you could go to Southampton now and get the money, but there's the danger you'll disappear in the quagmire of mediocrity that so many players they go to teams in England outside the top 10. Or give another shot at the Champions League, and in January, like Atletico Madrid, will probably come in again and will probably offer more than they did last year.
Yeah, I do get the sense it's that wee bit too soon. And I'm also clinging on to what Ian said there. He does seem like a different category of player when it comes to the mindset and the fact that he does have a career plan. I mean, that decision he made when he was at Fulham resulted in him being unemployed for a number of months and training with his old fella in a public park, because he really put himself out there. There was a huge amount of self-belief, but then the discipline, obviously, of maintaining your fitness throughout that period, but also maintaining your mental wellness throughout that period to believe that you could get a contract somewhere else, having come off the treadmill, which he did, and eventually he got his deal. We got his move to MK Dons, and the rest, as I say, is history. But I would rather we were, keeping our counsel, keeping our cards close to our chest, and all these nonsense stories that we're getting out there. I think Ronnie Glavin is probably right. There's been 150 linked players already. A lot, the majority of which will just be made up. Paul McQuaid, Celtic do not have a head of recruitment or an established recruitment team, period. They still don't have a head of recruitment. Jay Lefebvre, is that how you say it? Come on, Ian, help me out. You're a man of the world. You're continental. You're international. Tell me, how do you pronounce the guy's name? Help me out in the comment section. He is the head of scouting. He's working with Brendan and Michael Nicholson at the moment. Big shout out to David Canavan. I hope you're enjoying yourself in sunny Spain. And I hope you're enjoying yourself, Ali, in Arbroath. What a moustache that is. And also we've got Sunderland. We've got Tony Ratton. Sunderland, I'd be happy with O'Shea, though I doubt it will happen. And Paddy Lavery from Adul and Dreary Ardoyne. Thanks everybody for getting involved in the chat. Let us know your thoughts on the big discussion points. As we've been talking about the amount we're going to spend, would you rather we fed nonsense stories into the press and gave them too much information? Or are you quite happy with the way things are going? Engagement is key. Why was Brendan Rodgers not at the first training session at Lennoxtown? Why did John Kennedy give the first interview of the new campaign. That's because Brendan Rodgers is busy. He's busy trying to sign players for Celtic. Our first game's on Friday night, guys. Ayr United. Liam, I know it's a bounce game. It's for the opening of the new grandstand, but it's great to have Celtic back, isn't it?
Aye. Funny that into the Ayr United are going to open their new stand quite a while before Rangers do.
I know. We were doing it this tournament down in London, and there was honestly just within walking distance. I'm not at horse racing or whatever. It was Ascot, right? And we went up because you could see the stands from where we were. We went up. What a stand it is! Oh my word, unbelievable, right? And everything was, all the temporary stuff was getting dismantled. There was piles and piles of steel, piles of it. And I was just looking at it, thinking to myself, poor Rangers. Poor Rangers, you could have gone somewhere else to get all that gear. Ian, what about yourself? Looking forward to a nice wee Friday night friendly?
Oh, I love it. Yeah, always. I wish I was there. You know, I think it's things like this. Like I'm talking to my children. It's like I missed going to the match, you know, and sort of getting the bovril and the pie and all that kind of stuff. You know, and it seems all the more alluring because I can't actually do it. But absolutely, I'm all over it. Can't wait to see the team back. Yeah.
And Scott Bain's going to start, isn't he? Scott Bain is going to be in goals for Celtic. Right. Love that. Brilliant. Great to get Liam's thoughts all the way from Japan, and Ian dialing in from New Zealand as well. Let us know what you think in the comment section. We've got a couple of really tasty live events coming up. Joe Ledley's coming to Glasgow on the 26th of July. The following night, he will be joined by Charlie Mulgrew in Grangemouth. Tickets are available underneath this video. Thanks, everybody, for getting involved. And we'll see you again at 12:30 on A Celtic State of Mind.